Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Tata Steel, round 6 of the challenges section. The section where everybody is constantly battling it out. We had a rest day. It looked like they were finally going to calm down. And then we had 6 more decisive results. The standings are changing every round. It is impossible to keep up with. The chess is unbelievable. We're going to go through these games as quickly as we can. I don't want to keep you here forever. The first game, unfortunately, Faustino Oro, who was having a great tournament, he loses to the local player Max Varmdon. It was a King's Indian defense. And you know what? The King's Indian defense is just one of those openings. It is always going to be dynamic. It is always going to produce results. They threatened the repetition. There was this early exchange. And we get this. In the King's Indian, it's always dangerous to take here. Because there are certain tactics, like this, where you sack the knight to get the pawn back, and then the rook takes. Queen drops back, rook 81, and this position is leveled. Despite a few inaccuracies, the players have spent almost an hour getting to this point. I do apologize, my mouth's in a bit of pain. Rook to d6, e4, now targeting the knight, queen takes, but now look at this. That knight gets in here. With Tempe on the queen, it's threatened to come here, queen's on this, bishop's on this, the black position is just humming. Faustino Oro has to find a way to get everything sorted. So it first starts with queen e3, but now queen takes b2. Rook to d2, now queen to c3. Queen e7 is wrong, and now Max Varmdon just needs to find the right coordination of pieces. That queen is well offside. The rook's double, but now the pieces are just not coordinated well enough. You can kick the queen around. Could you imagine if bishop g3 was played a third time with it being a mistake, and Max plays queen b3, and they go here, and it should be a draw. If he plays queen b2 and now it's a draw, but he plays queen a4. He declines the draw by repetition. The rook gets targeted. This queen is so close to trapped. It's not even funny. Bishop e6 targets the rook, comes back, and now we threaten another repetition as the players get past the time control. And now we trade with the dark squared bishop, but black's position is just better. Knight to g4 is wrong. We're trying to... This queen just never played. Again, it couldn't get out. It could never get out. This queen is just completely trapped. h5 targets the knight. Knight to e3 is wrong because you can sacrifice the rook. Because your queen is still stuck here. F takes e3, now takes, and now look at this, bishop to e4, queen finally gets out, but check, now here, and now we come back with check, and here, and we give one more check, and we don't repeat, we play queen to d4. And Max Varmdon is completely winning, and he goes on to convert this very nicely indeed, gets the rook. Faustino Oro goes for perpetual, but he doesn't get it in the end, and after king to g8, he resigned. Next game. Vasil Ivanchuk defeating Elin Rubber. She's having a rough event. She played a French. It was a classical variation in and part of the Steinitz. We had rook to b1, and the French is always dynamic. She's played a lot of dynamic openings, and it has not benefited her at all. It's probably her her style of play, and she did get her point from a very good and dynamic position. But rook a c8, one move blunder. The best move was to play bishop to c6. And now c5, and now you've got problems. Your coordination is cut, the knight gets in, the rooks get in. It's all bad news. We can sacrifice the queen because of mate. Look at that. Sack the queen and mate. Unbelievable game. Daniel Yufa versus Lumioy. She started very, very well. 2 points from her opening 2 rounds. Has not done so well since. And we will talk about the standings in just a moment, but there is lots of change every round because of the number of decisive results. This one looked to be going for a draw. There were pieces exchanged very, very quickly. It was very symmetrical as the knights danced. We had a rook exchange. This game, though, just kept on giving. The knight was sacrificed to get this knight, and now we, changing the pawn structure consistently. And Daniel Yufa, what he does here is exquisite. He goes into this, a same color bishop endgame, but he's going to isolate Lumioy's pawns on dark squares so his bishop can feast. And he allows a trade, by the way. He would have allowed a trade, completely winning in the king and pawn endgame. And he gets here. And she can't defend everything. There's too many weaknesses. And eventually he will find a way in. And you can't defend everything. And now we exchange all of these. And now one pawn advantage is not necessarily enough. But if you can get a 2-pawn advantage, or you can freeze the 1 king, and now you can get here, and you can go and you can win a 2nd pawn. And Daniel Yufa won in very, very convincing fashion. He controlled that game very well. Next game, Marc-Andre Morizzi versus the women's blitz champion, Bibi Sara. She played a Sicilian. It was an open Sicilian. It was, one of the main lines. It was a Najdorf Sicilian, the sharpest variation you can play. And it's always interesting to see how these players go about playing these sharp positions. You don't always see grandmasters engaging in these fights. In this type of section you will, but we haven't spoken about many of these types of games in the open section, for example, the masters section. And we get this. Look at this. No castling for Bibi Sara. It's not good for her because she plays bishop to c6 and loses the game on the spot. There was a lot of that today. But your king's not safe. We've seen this tripled pawn structure before. In one of the other games, where one of the players played a Sicilian and got in here, we exchanged the rooks, and she was just winning. She won another pawn, and Marc-Andre Morizzi won another pawn, and was just dominating the position. Wins this, trades the queens into opposite colored bishops, but both of these are weaknesses. And while it might weaken your king, you can just push all of these. It's just completely winning. Look, you still play this position because it's not easy, and you're investing everything in getting this pawn down the board, but you never get it well enough, and I can defend everything. Bishops are beautiful pieces, and look at that. I can sacrifice the bishop, because if you take it, I push, and there's no way to stop the pawn. So, beautiful game. And then we got to the only draw. Erdin Suleimani, who was the leader going into this round, versus Vendin Panesar. This was the only draw of the round. It was a Catalan. It was an open Catalan, but it was this variation where you can equalize quite quickly as black, because you're often able to trade off the light squared bishops. And if you're able to do that in the Catalan, we get the queen kicked around, we exchange knights, we get the bishop to drop back, we take here, and there's quickly pieces that are going to come off. We decline the bishop trade, but you mount pressure as much as you can on the queen side, but we got this trade, the rooks double up, sacrifice like this, and we get to this position, which is just black's upper pawn, but these are really delicate, and they're black's best assets if he's going to push for a win, but it's not always feasible, and the queen gets in, and he's going to freeze the pawns, the rook here, and it's just easy. We sack the rook for the bishop, and now we get a draw by repetition. Queen g1, and they agreed upon a draw. Then we had Andy Woodward, the battle of the American youngsters, Andy Woodward versus Carissa Yip. This was a Spanish game. This was a closed Spanish. If I'm not mistaken, it was like one of the Archangels, if I'm not mistaken. Fabiana Caruana has played this. It's no surprise to see the two Americans borrowing from his repertoire. And, the Spanish is a maneuvering game. It's really difficult to explain all the key concepts and the key ideas. As we get all of these exchanges, how you have to constantly monitor how these positions transform. It is so difficult to go through a Spanish game, simply because of the amount of transformations and the complexity that comes with each transformation. This game was not played perfectly by any means. White got themselves, look at this, by the way. Sacrifice the rook, because if you take, then I sacrifice my bishop and win your queen. So, queen c1 check, and now king out the way. Now the rook was hanging. It gets down here, and, white and black were exchanging everything, and we got to this queen endgame, which should be a draw. Should 100% be a draw. And this was not a quick victory for Andy Woodward. He required a lot of moves to get through this. Black's upper pawn. It is so difficult to win this and to hold this, because you've got to find perpetual check. That is what black is guarding against, perpetual check by white. And you're trying to push your pawns and win pawns. You're constantly worried about these two threats. You're constantly worried about repeating the position. You got to guard everything. Look at how black has either given a check or guarded this pawn and guarded that pawn. And white is constantly defending this and trying to get after the black king. It is so difficult. These are some of the most difficult endgames to play. You know, black has had to weaken their king, but there's no repetition. The queen, the black queen, is defending just enough squares that the black king has got enough escape runs to make. Look at that. White's barely be able to give any check, shuffling the king back and forth, because you're hoping when black commits to something, to taking something, you're going to get in and you're going to get your draw. So how do you win this as black? It looks like you're perpetually stuck, even if it's not perpetual check. The queen always threatening to get in. A queen trade is winning for black because they're up a pawn. The king and pawn endgame is winning. But how do you defend everything? How do you get out the way of the checks? Eventually, you just got to march your king to the other side of the board. And still, you've got to avoid everything. Still, you've got to hang on. Still, it's not winning. Still, it's not easy. And this game goes on forever. We've passed 100 moves. 117 moves have been made. And it goes on forever. Eventually, a pawn breakthrough is made. We sacrifice the pawn to split and to now maybe open the white king to some troubles. Queen a2 and we win this back. But has that opened the door? Queen g7, and on the 128th move there are 2 moves that hold for white. There are only 2. You must play king e1 or you must play king f2. Those are the only 2 moves that hold. Instead, king g2 was played. And now a3 is possible. You can give a check, but it is wrong. The only move that gave any resistance here was to play e4. Because with queen takes e4, king h2, king h2, not king h3. You don't want to hang mate in 1. Now queen c2 check. Now king h3 is fine. And now a2. And now you might have a draw with queen e8. Now queen e8 might be the idea. And you might be able to draw this. Queen e8 immediately is wrong because the king comes out. Now check here, and going to a2 is wrong because of queen d5, which forces the queens off the board and white resigns. Final game, and that was on the 130 odd move. They passed 130 moves. Erwin Lamy. I'll be honest, the Dutch players in overall have struggled. Anish Giri struggling in his section. Jon van der Voort is not doing too bad a job. Max Ramram doing his best in this section. As the players maneuvered in what was a Queen's Gambit / Catalan-esque position, it was very dynamic, very early on, and we got long castles. You know when you get opposite side castling, you're in for a fight. Black was very brave. Castling into an open c-file. Just allowing everything, and you know, was under mate threats early on, was under huge pressure. Look at this move. Look at this move. Rook c7. It's +3 for white. The advantage has just grown. I'm threatening mate. By the way, in case you hadn't realized. The best move in this position, of which there's maybe 3, is to sacrifice the bishop. So the idea is if queen takes, now you take the rook, you lose. Okay. If pawn takes, a takes b4. Now king takes c7 is possible. Because queen takes a7, there's king d6. And it's a slightly different position. The bishop's not and whatnot. It's not under fire and it can get out the way and so on. Instead of the rook c7, king c7 was played. King takes c7, which loses, check. Here, and the difference is queen takes b6, king out, and now bishop e5 check. And now the queen goes to a7, rook d6, and short castles for the victory on move 32. You know how gangster it must be to castle and your opponent resigns? Because rook c1. Rook c1 is the huge problem. And ladies and gentlemen, let us now look at our standings after rounds of Tata Steel. And it looks like this. Andy Woodward is now the leader on 5 points. We have Marc-Andre Moretti on 4.5, Aidan Suleimani on 4.5. They are chasing him. Then Faustina Ora on 4. Then it's Vasily Ivanchuk, Daniel Yufa, Carissa Yip all on 3.5. Bibisari is by herself on 3. Max Vombran is by himself on 2. 2 points. 2 players are on 2 points, Vladimir Ivincic and Mioe Lu. After her first 2 rounds, she's not scored again. Erwin Lamy and Vendon Padasar both on 1.5. And Ilian Robers just a single point to her name after 6 rounds. So your front 3 are these 3 players. I hope you enjoyed the video. And let me know what you think and who's going to win from here, as we've just crossing halfway.